Webcam microphone up close. Webcam microphone up close.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was a...
But I have the files. I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things. I said to myself, how can that be possible? Days and the fondle slab of choice, I don't know, computers doesn't really matter. Internet, professional wrestlers, and not just Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the information comes from as long as it's real. It's hard to get real information. Because seriously, they don't want you to just read these two sources whenever I try to prove out. It's not a... You expect your government to tell you the truth, you're going to be sadly disappointed on another one of these things.
Dear Lord, what a dirty, dirty old man, huh?
Really? Can't be serious. Is this really how you want things to be? Come on. More hooker, eruptions? Eruptions, whatever.
Like Dave Powers kind of...
Really?
Allegedly broadcast live from Pima Region 2. Within the borders of the formerly united and currently occupied states of America, we bring you the Ochelli Effect.
Because I damn sure know I'm an original. We have all these situations. I'd love to know why it takes 50 years, for...
That's that.
For a 19-year-old girl to eventually get up the gumption to put these things out.
And that is certainly that on a Tuesday night, which is the 27th day of January 2015. Okay, it is the Ochelli Effect, as that obnoxious bumper tells you. I am Chuck Ochelli, your host on UCY.TV radio. Hour one, our generally almost always present Tuesday guest, Roger Landry of The Liberty Beacon. That is all one word, thelibertybeacon.com, will be our first hour guest. In the second hour, I'm going to have Rob Clark on from the Lone Gunman podcast, and we'll be discussing something that sounds like it would make sense with the Lone Gunman podcast, but who knows, because I never quite script, and we'll just see what we see when we see it, right? Oh, man, what a week it has been. Interesting enough when you see people from Fox News committing suicide and all that kind of good stuff, it gives you a residual effect about what the world is actually representing to us from a media standpoint, doesn't it? A lot of strange, interesting things there. I was actually thinking of focusing on that maybe on Thursday, but we'll see. Well, I don't know. I don't know yet. Also, an upcoming show will be, as soon as I can straighten out scheduling, H.P. Alvarelli I will have on to discuss the interesting case of Frank Olson. So, stay tuned for all that kind of good stuff. Alrighty. And now we'll begin to look into the area where, We'll begin to look into the portion of the show where I try and figure out whether the Skype is going to cooperate or not. Let's see how it goes. Hello. There we go. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it will. Hopefully I'm on the air. I have the chat room in front of me, by the way, for those of you who do join in at the chat. ucy.tv/TOE. That is the home page for it all. And I do thank everybody who's catching this further downstream on YouTube. If you're catching it through your electronic fondle slab of choice, you can check it out on the TuneIn app, the Shoutcast, all that kind of good stuff. Do appreciate every single person who tunes in. And speaking of those that I do appreciate, although, Roger, you have your camera on, so you might want to click that off. Roger Landry, the founder, the main ranter, the incredible production factory for articles, commentary, and all kinds of very serious reality out there at thelibertybeacon, all one word.com. And wow, it is always a privilege to have you on every Tuesday. We missed you last Tuesday, but it was a technical issue that kept you from showing up. So, what can we do, right? How you doing tonight, Roger?
I'm doing great. You throw all of these great accolades at me, most of which I don't feel I deserve at all, but you're a very nice person. And then you say, would you please shut your camera off? So basically what we're telling the world is this is a hell of a nice guy. He's a lot of really good things to say, but looking at him is not conducive to eating my lunch.
Well, actually, your camera always shows me the ceiling anyway, Roger.
Yes, of course it does. It's always pointed at the ceiling.
And listen, I've got a face for radio, so no matter what you look like, you're doing better than me. So, look, I'm not going to throw stones. I live in the glass house. Doesn't work that way. So
you run the Liberty Beacon Project, and we all have the utmost respect for what you say and what you do. So I don't know where this riff is coming from.
Well, hey, it's okay. Look, you don't have to look good in order to do the right thing, so it's all right.
You and I are both proof of that.
There you go. That's the point I was trying to get at. But no, I didn't have the wherewithal to type it to you to tell you that it was on. It was just a little glitch thing, and it'll make the audio a little strange if we leave it on. So that's the only reason why, folks.
Yeah, and so he tells you. But anyway.
Yeah, that's me. You know what? I don't believe in that whole fourth wall concept. I kind of, there are certain things I keep off the air, but generally speaking, I let most of it just hang. It is the way it is because, look, we're real people. We do real things, and, and I do the silliest and craziest of things possible sometimes, so I have no problem pointing out when,
Well, that's part of the conversation today because We've already discussed what has happened in this country and our big part in the fact that it has happened. A lot of what has happened in this country that is of a negative impact to we the people or on we the people has been allowed by we the people. If you just look through your history books, and of course, you're going to have to read through the lines on some of them because now they teach our children that the government grants them their rights, which is absolute tyranny. So I don't know, Chuck. It seems that you and I, we get some conversations going on that I don't really feel comfortable having with a lot of people because I'm not sure exactly what side of the fence they're going to come down on.
Well, you know what it is, though, is we're having these conversations and hopefully we're provoking some thought out there. We're getting people to look at the reality. Yes, here's the thing. There's a responsibility for the people who are supposed to actually be the highest authority. We are supposed to be on top of the proverbial pyramid, as it were. Hate to use that, but...
Yeah, go ahead. Use pyramid.
But we'll use pyramid. We're supposed to be the top tier there. We're supposed to be the one.
eye at the top of the pyramid.
You got it.
We're not seeing eye.
That's supposed to be us, really. I mean, We're not supposed to be observed by the all-seeing eye. We're supposed to be the eye, And I know that sounds like a really convoluted kind of way to put it, but I mean, that's the reality. We're supposed to be in control. These individuals who seem to wield power are actually our employees in a general sense and in a literal sense, right? So,
Any government left to its own devices by a people that become too complacent to really care, under the misnomer that I elected somebody because I trust him and he'll always have my best interest at heart or in mind, okay? This is where the snowball starts to roll downhill. Because any government left to its own devices shall eventually, accumulate power and wealth unto itself. This isn't a guess. This has been proven over and over and over again in the history books. Over and over again. All it takes for tyranny to be born is for one man with conscience to do nothing.
Well, you got it, and that's what it is. It's complacency and this is always the case.
It's fear as well, Chuck. You've got to admit that a lot of our commercials and a lot of our movies and a lot of our news magazines, they all put on this pretty face, and they all wear the perfect makeup, and every single strand of hair is in place. Okay, the message they're putting forth is all candy and marshmallows. So how the hell can you possibly expect to hear the truth come out of their mouth?
Well, and that is the other thing. The Fourth Estate has not done their job. But again, I believe it's because we haven't held them accountable. Up until recent years, there hasn't been a movement toward independent or citizen journalists or anything like that. But the reason why there's a necessity for independent media and citizen journalists at this point is because the Fourth Estate was never kept in check by us either. See, I blame that on us as well.
Right. Now, what we're going to discuss today is, all right, and this sort of leads on to the article I did a little while back about let's quit blaming everybody but ourselves, because a lot of this blame does lie on us. So what we're going to discuss is, okay, I'm just going to, before I go into the article, germinate a few ideas into your head. All right, all of a sudden, we have what we want. We have true representation in Washington, D.C. All right? We do. We have money out of politics, and the people are in the driver's seat. Are we prepared for this? How do we treat our fellow men? If the government steps out of line, the people are the first in line, clamoring and waving their pitchforks. I wish there were more of them, but the number's growing by the day.
Right.
But how do we, as communities, teach or treat each other? How do we? And we'll get to that. Let me get through this short essay, if you wouldn't mind, Chuck.
No, absolutely. And I just want to add one thing to what you said, and then we'll get right into it, because this is extremely relevant. A lot of people are going to think that it isn't, but it is absolutely relevant. It's not just relevant, it is the argument itself. Because here's the reality that I always try and stress. It is that if we do not change ourselves, regardless of what conditions we enact, regardless of what politicians we enact, if we don't learn to be better human beings on our own first, because we've been tainted by this stuff for so long, if we don't, then it's going to do no good. It's going to do no good, even if we got all of our wishes granted, as it were, from the political wish fairy, okay, and all of a sudden we had an honest government that was actually looking out for us, that wasn't run by lobbyists and everything else. Even if you remove all of that from the equation, if you have terrible human beings that are supposed to be holding this whole thing in check, it's going to do no good.
I won't even step out of the passing lane that far, okay? What I would say is, what if all of a sudden we did have the true governance we deserve in this country via the Constitution and the Bill of Rights? What if we did? We have an entire society that has been beaten brain dead medically, physically, the food we eat, the entertainment we watch. We have a very skewed idea of what reality is anymore.
You got it.
And what most people don't understand is, if we can't develop as we develop this movement, then getting there isn't going to get us anywhere. What comes after? If you can't think of the solutions because the problems are in your way, you'll never have solutions. So yes, we need to look at the people around us. We need to look at the people we are involved with on a daily basis. Now, the name of this article is, and Chuck, I beat you on this, "May I have a slice of pizza, please?" And that's exactly what it means. Can I have a slice of pizza, please? Mm-hmm. Now, this article is set up around a short video, which I would ask everybody to watch. It's at the bottom of the article, but I'd ask you to watch it because it's a very short article. It's like 400 or 500 words at the most. I would ask you, watch the article, and I'm going to set the video. I'm going to set it up for you for those who can't watch the video. It's about a couple of gentlemen who go into restaurants where people have plates in front of them that are stacked with food that it's gluttonous. Mm-hmm. And asked for a piece of pizza and were told no. Went to another restaurant, same situation, was told no. Went to another restaurant, same situation, was told no. And this guy really looked the part of somebody who was hungry. Then they changed up a little bit. And they took a box with about 3 or 4 slices of pizza in it, found a homeless man, and handed him the box of pizza and said, here, my friend, you look hungry. You could probably use this. And the homeless man was very grateful, and he took it. Now, that in itself should warm your heart up a little bit, okay? They helped a homeless guy out, but that's not where this story ends. Now, remember, all of the people that were well-to-do and had more food in front of them, they couldn't possibly eat it all. Doggy bags were in their future, guaranteed.
Mm-hmm.
Refusing to do anything to help this guy. About 5 minutes after they gave this homeless man this box with a few slices of pizza in it, they sent one of their guys over, and he said, "Excuse me, are there a few extra slices in there?" And the guy went, "What? Do you have a few extra slices?" And the homeless man said, "Sure I do. Are you hungry? Would you like a slice?" And he gave him one, and they sat down and ate it together and got up, walked away, shook this homeless man's hand and got up and walked away. Now, what I'm taking from this is those in society today have so much, and they guard it so closely that you're not going to get near it. And the rising tide of Americans that have so little and realize what it was at one time to have so much are those who can see the value in sharing. We are a society that has been split right down the middle, and it gets worse by the day. The haves and the have-nots are things we have heard about over and over again. Believe them. Never in America has it ever been so abundantly clear. So watching this video has moved me to a bit of a rant on the topic. Most are too blind or intentionally ignore. Okay, why does it seem to prove out a majority of the time that those who have the most will protect it with extreme prejudice, and those who have the least are the most apt to share the quickest? Today we live in a society, excuse me, where ultimately those who have the most are paying less in cost or privilege, and those who have the least are paying more in cost, price, and freedom. This is not the foundation America was built on, but it is an evolution of a society fixated more and more on possessions and the me mindset and less on people or the society that surrounds them or the we concept. And we're going to get into the me and the we concept much deeper. I'm almost through this. Okay, it also seems that everyone, excuse me, who intrudes into that protected and guarded bubble of comfort or isolation is immediately perceived as a threat to some degree, and greed immediately oozes to the surface in the false perception of self-defense or the preservation of what is mine. It didn't matter how much was sitting on the plates of those individuals in that restaurant. They were not going to give up a slice of that pizza. Okay. So, and this divide or chasm separating the haves from the have-nots grows wider daily. There are many, but today a shrinking minority, who still believe or who still benefit from the system as it is, only benefiting the haves while isolating and taxing physically and monetarily to the point of exhaustion the have-nots. The real problem here is even those who consider themselves among the haves. Wake up listening to me, people. If you consider yourself among the haves, okay, you're in for a really, really serious wake-up call. Mm-hmm. There are only so many seats at the elite's dinner table. And over 99% of you who falsely believe you have a seat will be seriously disappointed when your invitation to dinner never arrives. Maybe being a little kinder to the growing number of have-nots surrounding you is not such a bad idea. Because the day is coming soon when your bubble of comfort will pop. And it just may be you asking for a slice of pizza, please.
Yeah, and this is precisely the situation that we find ourselves in. And look, we talk a lot about the elites and about, those who are in power, but on a real human level, there is this other set of individuals that believe themselves above the fray when it comes to being in a position of wanting, being in a position of needing.
But again, what we need to understand is the extent of this melancholy attitude and the effect it could have even if we got what we wanted. Let's take a real quick, for instance, I believe it happened in Florida, but somebody can correct me if, again, I'm not going to dare you to prove me wrong on this one, but I know the circumstances, okay, where a municipality, a township, has passed a law banning the feeding of homeless people because it encourages them to stick around and mooch. Are you kidding me? The number of homeless in this country is at a historical high. The number of unemployed exceeds the Great Depression. The numbers are just handled a lot better.
Right.
Okay? Stop and think about this, Chuck. Stop and think about it. Okay, what is the difference between the haves and the have-nots today in this country? The middle class is being decimated steadily. And when you look around you, at everybody around you, and you realize that they live in that isolated bubble. Most of these people don't even know the neighbor that lives 4 doors down from you. When I was growing up, I knew everybody on the street. I knew every one of their kids. I had dinner at every one of their houses at least once a month. Mm-hmm. Today, ask the average person on the street who the neighbor is that lives across the street 3 houses down. I will bet you that 90% of the time or better, they haven't got a clue.
Well, and this is absolutely correct. It is part of the disconnect of society that has gone on. Now, some people, I do blame it partially on the technological age, but it was really...
and that's not intentional, right? Come on. Okay. Let me take my tinfoil hat off here.
No. I'm not saying it's not intentional. It's definitely intentional, but there is more to it than that.
I agree.
There has been a greater condition which was in place long before we had all of these wonderful little toys, okay, that led to this. And what has happened really is there is this us and them, the allowance in people's minds to believe that there is a real difference between themselves and the individuals who are in that have-not category.
Okay, let's take this one step further because, again, it's not just the have and have-nots. You pretty much hit the nail on the head when you were talking about, people and their attitudes. But let's talk about all of this conditioning that we've all swallowed, okay? Mm-hmm. Let's talk about those who do feel that they have a place that sits higher up in the hierarchy than you do. And a lot of them are the same people who we work with continuously on a daily basis, and they're not even aware of this. The average person might deal physically with a half a dozen people today, but over the course of a day on social media and whatever else they deal with, especially if they deal with a project like this, they might deal with a couple hundred people. Mm-hmm. Now, let's put that into perspective. You and I both know that when we were younger, you were much younger, and I was probably about your age, that when you talked to somebody, when you sent an email or whatever, you showed respect because you wanted respect back. Let's look on the media today and look at the total lack of respect. Look at the way people answer you. Look at the vulgarity that is thrown around. But yet, these are the people that if you go to 2, 3, 4 dozen liberty-based groups of one focus or another, they're in each and every one of them. What are they doing? These aren't trolls. Believe me, I'm really good at spotting them. What they're doing is establishing themselves within that hierarchy. And if you're not agreeing with what they're saying, then there are very good and very subtle methods to make you look stupid. Mm. We see a society that wishes to isolate ourselves from a physical world and expand our consciousness globally in an electronic world. You ain't going to run a country that way. You're not going to raise 2 kids that way. You're not going to pay for a car that way. And you're definitely not going to keep your government from slamming tyranny down your throat that way.
Well, right, and this is, but again, this goes back to the disconnect where people live their entire lives via these electronic means, and that's that's the thing. It's not
So
real.
who would you say, in your best guesstimation, are the teachers of the generation that's going to count in this country? The generation that's either going to lose America or regain America. Who would you say are the best teachers and why? And now I'm putting you on the spot, Chuck. But I have a feeling you're going to come up with a sterling answer here.
Well, it's amazing. The best teachers that they're going to have, unfortunately, is going to be the past couple of generations that have let things slip by. I think the generation that's about ready to come into adulthood is almost lost. I think the ones coming up behind them, though, are going to see that downward staircase and say, wait a minute, these people are totally disconnected from one another. They're totally disconnected from the world around them. I really do believe that level of awareness is going to have to come just a little bit. Unfortunately, it's about probably another 15 years off.
I actually don't think so. And what I do think is that your answer was spot on. I'm 60 years old. I just took in a new partner to the project who wrote a book, which we're going to be doing a show about that real soon, about not only how to fix America, not only what's wrong with America, but he has a book of solutions. This guy spent his entire adult career, he's 80 years old, putting companies together and making them successful. And he is a very, very, very confirmed patriot, very, very, very deeply entrenched in the solutions that are workable for we the people. So, yeah, we are seeing this, Chuck. And it is the shock of the shock and awe. The shock has to come from the 50-year-old generation and up. The 50, 60, 70, 80-year-old generation. Because we saw what we didn't have. Or what we don't have now. We saw what we lost. The generation Chuck and I are talking about right now doesn't know because, God, most of the time they've been alive for the last 20 years, most of this stuff was basically negated to the realm of obsolescence. As I had discussed, our rights are now granted to us by a government instead of inalienable to us, and with a government whose task is to protect us and allow us to exercise those rights. So all of this is shifting.
Right. Well, the post 9/11 reality that the generation coming up now came into consciousness during is exactly what the problem is. This is the bottom of the barrel here.
We need to be the shock, and we need the 40-year-olds and under to be the awe.
Well, that's it. That's what it comes down to, and I mean, I'm right in the middle there. So,
yep.
So I'm kind of on both sides of this in a way, because I do recall when this country was in a different shape. I do recall when neighbors did not function the way they do now. I do recall, and I didn't come up in like a nice middle class area or anything like that. I mean, when we talk about the homeless, this to me is not some fictitious construct, some abstract idea. I spent part of my young life in that condition, because, not through my own doing, but the fact was that this is the way I grew up, very much on the bottom of the social scale, as it were. So I understood what that was like. But even in the poorest places where I was, even in areas where you would expect, there to be nothing but victims and victimizers, there was still a sense of community. Okay.
There are only those two in the government's eyes. There are only the victims and the victimizers. There is nothing in between. There's no gray area. It's black or white. Mm-hmm. When you have, and I've given this quote twice already, maybe 3 times on your show, when you have the director of the CIA in 1981 saying, we will know our program of disinformation has succeeded when everything the American public believes is false. Are you freaking kidding me?
Well, but
it doesn't get any more blatant than that. It can't get any more blatant than that.
But that is, again, the reality that has evolved during my lifetime. I mean, literally during my lifetime. This is when this country changed.
it's when because this all started in 1871. Actually, it started 20 years after the birth of this country, when we put our first central bank in, which only had a 20-year charter, thank heaven. But in 1871, all of this started. And everybody thinks that this started happening a few years ago. No. When the United States became a corporation, that's what started this. The next kick in the scrotum came from the twin kicks of the institution of the income tax and the Federal Reserve. Then, right after that, followed up by the Great Depression, which was nothing more than a sieve stated by Roosevelt's own son-in-law in his memoirs, nothing more than a sieve for the rich to suction a hell of a lot of wealth out of America, which they managed in doing. So if we continue it forward, this ain't new. What we have seen since 2000 is that the pieces that have been being put in place in a very careful and functional fashion for the last 2+ centuries are close enough to fruition, they can accelerate the program. This is what we're seeing now. We are seeing a massive acceleration in tyranny and the loss of political rights since the year 2000. We have seen on this planet since before World War II.
Well, precisely, but that's my point, is that really all this stuff was being done behind the scenes, kind of being done behind the curtain, if you will, up until the time.
Well, you got a huge ship. You can't turn a huge ship by spinning the wheel and taking a 90-degree turn.
Oh, no.
You can't do it. You've got to turn it in slow increments. It might take 3 miles for an ocean liner to change course 90 degrees. But, hey, you know what? If the elite have anything, it's patience, my friend.
See, this is the thing. But when we start to see it become naked in its just obvious nature, was during my lifetime. I contend, because I was born at the beginning of the 70s. And during that time, say in that first decade of my life, things didn't seem all that strange. Yeah, they were getting a little bit odd, but once the 80s came in, once the 90s came in, we started to see things turning, and then a massive acceleration since the turn of the century. And of course, like I say, post 9/11, here we have
overdrive.
Overdrive, yeah. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. But you are exactly correct, and I've said this about the Civil War before, is that post Civil War, this is when we actually lost the country, because effectively what happened is, we
were broke.
We were broke. And they figured out that they could mortgage all of us against each upcoming generation, one after another. And they finally, after the second bank was, dissolved and all that kind of good stuff, and we know that story. The third one comes into place after they stage a crisis like they always do, problem, reaction, solution. The 1907, the Panic of 07, as it were. Yep. Was the perfect introduction to bring in the central bank. And then in order to feed the central bank, we had to make sure we entered into, what was that? World War I. Magically, we had to enter because the Russians were too busy dealing with their own upheaval, as it were, their own revolution, as it were, because, well, we know what happened there, but they had to exit. So they needed a greater generator to come on in, and so the United States was kind of put in Russia's place, as it were, or in the Soviet Union's place, as it were, in order to continue on the draining of the wealth, as it were. And this is what the mechanism has been ever after. And of course, the IRS is just yet another one of these wonderful mechanisms, another corporation, which is not really a government institution, turning around and drawing again, taking that money out through the very same type of sieve that
Well, the Great Depression. Let's use a billows here, okay? When you're trying to get a fire going, all right, you put some hot coals and you put some tinder and you use your billows and you suck the air in and you blow the air out, and you suck the air in, you blow the air out. It doesn't matter whether you're sucking the air in or blowing the air out. It's accomplishing the exact same thing. It's feeding the fire. Because when you're opening the billow up, it's forcing air from surrounding the fire, drawing oxygen in. When you're closing the billow or forcing it together, you're forcing air out, which has oxygen, which also feeds the fire. So it doesn't matter whether it's depression or recession. It doesn't matter. Each and every one of these mechanisms is set up to siphon wealth from a nation. There is no such thing as a naturally occurring recession or depression in the history of this country, and I dare you to prove me wrong. Every one of them has been choreographed.
I would not even try. Every single one of these, financial valleys, as it were, has absolutely been manipulated and constructed in order to, again, sap the wealth, sap the potential wealth even out of this country. The problem is, though, is that the game has gone on so long. Who knows? Maybe I'm just one of these kooky people. But all I see at this point is that, they can't really keep propping up the game too much longer. I mean, look, you blow a balloon up, as large as you can. After a while, it's going to get so thin that you'll be able to see through it. And then after that, it's just going to pop. And this is the thing, is that the monetary system has precisely done that with our so-called, currency. I hate to even call it currency, but, it is what most things do swim in, isn't it? Currents. But
if you consider that anything based on debt must, in fact, lead to additional debt, then the very first day of the Federal Reserve in this country was the very last day of true freedom in this country. Because with debt comes commitment. The commitment cannot come from the government. So it must come from what the government considers to be its assets. What are the government's assets? We are.
Right. And just for everybody's clarification, the last presidential administration that was in office when we actually paid off our debt was by a guy named Jackson.
Yeah.
Andrew Jackson, in fact, actually paid off the national debt.
Yep.
That's the last guy who did it. Okay, so...
Well, I'll tell you what I think the solution to the national debt is, and the solution to every single national debt on the planet is. We know that a massive amount of monies have been made illegally by the top 8 families. We know that for a fact. And a lot of it has come down to big corporations they own getting a hand slap, paying a $100 million fine on a $3 billion profit. Mm-hmm. And everybody's happy. Okay, so we know what's going on with the system, and we know that the system is just so overblown at this point. I have a question before I finish this up, because I really need to hear your answer on this.
Uh-oh.
Okay? Yeah. All right. If you could pay off every national debt on this planet, okay, what would you expect from each nation in return?
Well, let's get perspective correct here. I mean, who am I in this equation?
You're the person who has enough money to pay off. Just walk up to any nation and say, I'm paying off your debt. What would you expect from that nation?
Oh, so if I'm in the hypothetical position of not necessarily being one of the existing controllers, but just somebody who had that kind of wealth?
Yeah.
I would probably, look, from an intelligent standpoint, I would probably say that I would want to be repaid.
Okay, this is a trap, and I apologize for that. Okay, it is, because I'm asking as if there should be some answers you should give me. All right, this is exactly why I would never let anybody volunteer to pay off the national debts, because with any favor comes strings. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you do. Even if you say things with the best of intentions. All right, if I pay off your debt, then you've got to do this. Your minimum wage has to do this. And basically what you are doing is becoming a dictator at that point. Okay, you are stating and stipulating circumstances that must be met in order for me to do something charitable for you. And it's always going to happen. How would I pay off the national debt? First thing I would do is I would take the families of 8 to court. These are the 8 richest families. They make up what we call the elite on this planet. Mm-hmm. They are worth an estimated value combined exceeding $300 trillion. The national or the world's combined debt, I believe, is between 40 and 50 trillion dollars. What I would do is I would take the families of 8 to court. I would get every single conviction I could possibly get on them. I will tell them they can pick their biggest, fanciest home. They can go back and live there for the rest of their life, unencumbered, but imprisoned. Okay? And I would take $60 trillion out of their over $300 trillion. And I would pay every national debt off on this planet. Because where the hell do you think they got over $300 trillion in only 8 families?
Well, see, my first answer sounded crazy in my own head. That's why I stumbled a little bit. Because my first answer was, well, just tell those 8 families that we're not going to pay the bill. Stiff them. End of story. Just wipe the books clean and tell them you're not getting your cut. That's simple. And what would they lose by that? Well, you just illustrated it. They would lose about 1/5 of their total wealth, and that would be the end of it.
And every nation on the planet would have zero weight on their back, and and that would make every federal, every bank, Fed in every country just all but obsolete.
Mm-hmm. That would be the end of the need for continuing the practice. Exactly.
Why not take it from the people who took it from you?
Well, that's why I said my first real response was to just stiff them on the bill. I mean, if every nation refused to pay, what would they do? I often wonder this. If we actually had a real serious summit of all of the, alleged leaders of all these alleged nations across the planet simply sit there and say, look, we're just not going to participate in this anymore, wouldn't that be the end of the problem?
Well, you use the word leaders, and I would tell you that over 90% of the leaders on this planet are bought and paid for from your local Walmart, more than likely. Because getting them cheaper and cheaper by the day.
There you go. That's what the problem is that they're working for the same guys. So, you're not going to tell your boss that you're not going to.
Well, we brought this conversation up because I knew this could go off in so many directions. But what I want to discuss over the next few minutes, because we've got a little over 15 minutes left, is what are we like as a society? Not so much what we've been made into. That's what we just spent the last 40 minutes discussing. Mm-hmm. What we've been made into, what it's turned us into. Okay, but yet I see that a gentleman from this group on social media coming over to a gentleman to have a discussion in this group, whereas what he says over here, everybody's listening, everybody thinks it's great. Over here, there's a different king on the hill, and he doesn't like being made, to look anything less than the king on the hill. So we end up by having a little bit of friction. And the next thing we know, we've got arguments. These are things we see on a daily basis. This has been overused, but if you can't get your own house in order, we constantly say, Chuck, the only way we the people will win is with the numbers we do have available. All we need is a large minority. 30% of this nation would rock the world. Mm-hmm. Guaranteed. If 30% of this nation stood up, it would rock the freaking world.
Well, that's the thing is we're not there. We're not there because Oh, boy.
All right, so that's what we're discussing today. How are we going to treat our fellow, our community mates, the people who live across the street? What happens when there's no water for me to drink? Okay, I'm going to tell you what's going to be happening in the cities, Chuck. There's going to be people walking around with guns in their pockets, and if you got something they want, they're going to take it, and you ain't going to say crap about it. And I'm going to tell you that most of the National Guard is not going to be stationed within the cities. They're going to be blockading the cities from people getting in.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be a freaking shooting gallery. So how are we as individuals, let's say there is a revolution in this country, and we do know that the power grid suffers, and we do know that food deliveries suffer, and we do know until the pieces can be put back together, how do we live as a society? Do we know our neighbors? Can we survive for more than a week? Because your grocery store is going to be bare within 24 hours. I guarantee it. Nothing there.
Well, or less, as I observe every time there is a weather emergency on its way. This kind of stuff happens in a microcosm really, really quickly. You got a couple of hours and everything is cleared out. Everything's cleaned out. People bear down, hunker down at first. But then when their home supplies run out and then they have to venture out, this is where we're going to be looking at something entirely different.
Well, what we're going to be looking at, I apologize for interrupting, what we're going to be looking at is we're going to be looking for those people who were aware all along exactly what was going on, but didn't want to stick their nose into it because of fear, because of what it would bring back on them, what it would bring back on their family, or because it would destroy their comfort bubble. These are the people. I would tell you right now that just due to the polls on the White House and Congress, they're very, very, very unpopular. All right? If you could assure everybody in this country that you can tell me whether or not you are pissed off at this government with total impunity, nobody will ever know. What do you think the number would be, Chuck, on people who have just had it with this government? Had it.
See, I'm going to object to some of those numbers, and I'll tell you why. Because some of them are ignorantly believing that, look, if we just get rid of Obama, everything's fine. Because he's a bad guy all by himself. He's like the Muslim, so he's got to go. And these people are actually communists. And if we just bring in the Republicans, everything will be okay. Dissatisfaction does not qualify as awareness. It just doesn't. There is a great deal of dissatisfaction with this government, but a lot of it is ignorant at this point, where it's like, well, gee, if we could just get rid of, even in some of the states where, okay, you don't have an objection to the Obama side of the regime or the Obama side of the coin, right?
There's a place like that left in this country?
There are a couple of places where they're not totally fed up with them. I talk to people on occasion that actually, make it sound like they think everything is, screwed up because of the Republican obstruction in the government. Okay? I kid you not. They think that this is where all of the problems come from.
I do believe this. I do.
And I say, well, gee, don't you think that there is a problem with the system in general? Don't you think that it's got nothing to do with, you think your guys are your guys because they're holding up, the same Bible that you think you read from? You think that these guys are your saviors? You're making a big mistake here. This whole system is bought and paid for on both sides.
And this whole system is going to be taken down intentionally. It was built to siphon off the assets that would be required to bring in a new world order. That's why we've had depressions. That's why we've had recessions. That's why we've had specific industries that have monopolized themselves into huge global conglomerates. All of this is the 2 centuries plan that we've been talking about. All of this is coming to fruition. They are going to shut the lights out on us. The problem with us is, are we going to do something about it? And do we know who we live next to? Is that the neighbor who's going to slam the door in your face the first time you go over there because you haven't eaten in 2 days and say, may I please have a slice of pizza?
Well, that's the thing. Is if
we do not have that connection, Chuck, between us as a community. Communities built this country, and it's what's going to rebuild this country. If we do not have that community connection, then we will be among the wayward souls when the crap hits the fan.
Well, precisely right. This is why I always say, again, that we need to stand together. Okay, regardless of where it is you came from, what it is you think you have, because most of that is an illusion, by the way. But let's put it all aside. If we don't understand that we're all human beings and we will all be subject to the greater conditions that are out here, if we don't understand that, okay, and stop with this dividing and subdividing of all of us, we're just making their jobs easier.
Well, and the thing of it is, you make another sterling point. There are 10,000 things out there that people are railing against, and each and every one of them thinks that they have one of the most paramount points to the survival of humanity. And you know what? Each and every one in their own right is right. They are. Everybody out there has something they're pushing for, and they're all consider themselves to be a part of the liberty movement. We don't need everybody to agree on everything down to a gnat's butt. All we need is for everybody to stand up together, speak in a unified voice, telling the government, this ain't working for us. It's only working for you. And it wasn't intended to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we need to understand. We need the one compelling agreement that everybody in the everybody in the liberty movement can agree on. The system is broken, and the people who broke it are the people who are in power, and we can take them out of power any time we wish. Don't tell me you can't. Do you know what a recall is? We can strip these people of power any time we wish. But if everybody says, I'm not going with you guys because this is what I think the problem is, and the other guy says, well, I'm not going with you guys because this is what I think the problem is, you're all right, and we all lose. But the one thing every one of you idiots agreed on when you decided not to help each other was that the system was broken.
Mm-hmm. Well, exactly.
So we need that one point of commonality, Chuck. That's what's missing. Something is going to happen in the near future that is going to bring a new coin I'm going to term. It's going to be unity, whereby you are going to see a lot of people throw out the petty bickering, the petty differences, and the grievances and say, if we don't all start speaking together, there might not be time to talk tomorrow.
And this is exactly where I'm at with it, is that we do need to come to a point of unity. I don't particularly care if you think that, chemtrails are the one and only threat to humanity. I don't care if you think that, the genetically modified organisms in the food are the one and only greatest threat to humanity. If the political corruption, the intelligence apparatus as it is completely out of control, perpetual warfare.
Because they all are run by the same idiots pulling the same strings. If you rail against any of them, the path always leads up to their front door.
You got it. The corporate monsters, the drug industrial complex, the pharmaceutical industrial complex, which are two different things, although they are quite intertwined and incestuous. Guess what? It's all tied together to one big, huge monster. And this is what we're all after. We may be each fighting a different tentacle, but if we somehow chop off one, we're not killing the entire monster. And this is what we can all do together. Okay? I think of it like an octopus, and I do go back to that kind of analogy, but what?
It does work, because basically what it does boil down to is, even if we get what we want, are we the people we want to lead it? Because, again, what are we trying to do? We're trying to revive a republic, which means no more sitting on your lazy can and relying on some bought and paid for politician to go to Washington and represent you. And then 2 years later going, oh, my God, I don't have the right to assemble in my town square and protest anymore. And then you go and look at the register and you find out that that guy you sent to Washington to represent you voted for that.
Yep.
And then you voted to put him back in 2 years later. And then you voted to put him back in 2 years later. And all you did was embolden this idiot. So it's not really just a question of what happens if we win or what happens, not if, what happens when we take America back. It's not just the government we need to be leery of or weary of. It is we the people. We're going to be the government. We're going to make the changes. We're going to decide what's good for my neighbor, what's good for my children, what's good for my community. Well, we have to start thinking that way again, Chuck, and it's something we haven't done for a very long time. If we don't at least start to broach the subject now, will it ever happen?
Well, that's the thing, and this is why I do involve myself in these discussions. And people say a lot of times, like, why do you care about this stuff? You're more worried about the system. You're more worried. Well, here's the problem. I'm also worried about the people around me. I would like all of us, even the walking wounded out there who have no idea about what's going on, guess what? I'd like to see them do well, too. I'd like to see everybody do well. I'd like to see all of us be able to stand up and take a free breath. Okay, I'd like all of us to get a fair shake, every last one of us, whether you like me or not, whether, you agree with me or not. I'd like to see all of us. And by us, guess who I'm talking about? Okay, every single person deserves the opportunity to be free. Every single person deserves the opportunity to make their way through life. And I don't mean by, getting themselves expensive baubles and, up to their eyeballs in mortgages and things like this. I do mean by the actual means of having a decent life.
Well, I would tell you, I wrote a meme up a while back for just that. And I have so many people saying it's always so tough to get into a discussion with somebody who I know is intelligent enough to sway them over to what's actually going on. But I don't know if it's going to hurt our relationship. And we're coming to a point real close in the history of this country when that should be the last thing on your mind. But the meme reads, if we truly wish to win this struggle for liberty, this will require vast numbers. Okay? Mm-hmm. This being said, the masses who would push back against us are not lost. Okay? We have just not reached them yet. And this will only be done via respect. R-E-S-P-E-C-T. R. Reach out to those who are buried in the fog of lies. E. Educate those who are ignorant by denial. S. Satisfy those with the thirst for the truth. P. Protect those who would fall to the evil of tyranny. E. Exemplify what it truly means to be an American. C. Communicate with those who share your values. T. Take back America. Respect. It will work.
Well, there's no better way to have put that, Roger. And, it's always amazing and thought-provoking to have you on. And yes, this is, like I say, a change of gears for the type of stuff we usually talk about on here, but it is extremely poignant. It is part of the point. You have to get yourselves in order, and you have to get your fellow neighbors, your fellow man in order too, with you. You
need communities. We're going to come to a point in American history. It might be a year from now, it might be 2 years from now, it might be 5 years from now. I wouldn't put it much past that. I'd put it a lot sooner. But when it does happen, the only thing you are going to have to depend on are the people you can stick your face out the front door and holler at the top of your lungs and they can hear you. You need to be a community. Again, from communities rose a great nation. From communities, a nation will heal.
Absolutely. So, I know that we're about out of time here with you, and I just want to say, that I really do appreciate it, and it's a real serious privilege to have you on here every week. And we talk about nothing but the really, truly important points that need to be made. And I got to tell you, it always gives me things to ponder after the broadcast, Roger. That's something else that you do, by the way. Is my thought process doesn't end when we hang up.
I've been down sick for almost 6 full days, and I have a backlog of so much going on that pondering is a luxury I think I'm going to have to put on the back burner for a week or two.
Well, it's the kind of thing that I have to do while I'm engaged in other activities, but because as you know, I have my hands full as well. But
Yes.
but the thing is, it's just the evolution of thought never does cease, and I'm so glad that you do this with me, because always amazing stuff that I wouldn't necessarily have brought out to begin with. Sometimes it's stuff that I just feel like saying yes after everything you say, but. But other times I have to sit back and think to myself, you know what, this is a very good point. I'm glad that we brought this out. Let me add to this a little bit. This is just an absolute privilege to have you on. And everybody that's...
Second hour.
Well, my second hour is actually a little different. It'll be Rob Clark from the Lone Gunman podcast. Yeah, that's actually a pretty cool thing I've been noticing lately, and I wanted to talk to him about it. Little off the Liberty Beacon track at the moment, but...
Chuck, we get a chance to talk about the Liberty Beacon all the time, and you offer us that time very graciously. Of course, everybody out there should know that Chuck is also the media director for the Liberty Beacon Project. So he's just making sure we're not going to be off in a corner pouting somewhere. So he gives us a little bit of time.
And we have a lot of things that are going to be coming up, a lot of announcements that are going to come out of the Liberty Beacon very, very soon. Just waiting for a parcel and a few other things to happen, Roger.
Yep.
As you know, and then we will have a great many other announcements to make, other places we can direct people to pick up the greatest information, the most necessary information for moving forward, getting back to taking all of this back, getting back to seeing the possibility of liberty for all, as it were. So I can't thank you enough, Roger, and I know you have a great deal to do. I know that you've been behind a little bit, and again, everybody, the Liberty Beacon, all one word.com, okay? You can see all of this wonderful stuff, and you'll be able to check out the announcements there if you don't catch me on Tuesdays here. So thank you so much, Roger. I do appreciate it, and I'm going to let you go tonight and tell you, look, I'm glad you're feeling better, and hope you continue to feel even better, Roger, okay?
All right. Thank you, my friend, and have a great night.
You do the same. Roger Landry. So, and of course, this is extremely thought-provoking, and I am going to switch gears a bit here, bringing in Mr. Clark, who does this rather fascinating podcast called The Lone Gunman. He's also working on some other project now, which we'll probably get a chance to discuss.
Yes.
Oh, there we are. Hi, Rob.
Hey, Chuck, how you doing?
All right. I heard myself there for a second, but you seem to have corrected it. Appreciate it.
No problem.
So, how you doing tonight?
Doing just fine. And yourself?
Well, all right, man. All right. Listen, I'm really fascinated by what you're doing, and with the Lone Gunman podcast, and caught a recent episode. Actually, got to listen to it in its entirety. Which, believe it or not, I got so much to listen to watch, to read. Sometimes I get backlogged in the most extreme, but I got to tell you, one of your most recent episodes was of great interest to me. And you know what? Why don't we try and tell the audience actually, why it is you started doing this, and what the Lone Gunman actually is, and a little bit about yourself too.
Sure thing. Well, I've been studying the JFK assassination for like 25 years or so, and when you look at something that long, and you read up on stuff that long, and you research things that long, there comes a point in your life where you got to start doing something with it. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not smart enough to write a book. I don't really have anything profound to say. And I just wanted an outlet where I could express myself, throw some thoughts out there, get a conversation going, things of that nature. Just things to start a conversation with other like-minded people.
It's kind of funny. That sounds like the reasoning why I started the YouTube channel that I did for a while. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but the Blind JFK Researcher channel, I was doing that for a while. Pretty much started answering questions because I did a couple of presentations, and then I started answering questions from people that were emailing me and stuff, and wound up doing this, which isn't necessarily always JFK focused, which is, much to my dismay, really. I'd probably just focus on that all the time because I spent about the same amount of time on it as you did. However, I ended up in a unique position where I was helping other people get pieces of their research done and things like that. And also doing my own independent work, which I haven't put into a book either, because I felt as though I really didn't have much to add to the discussion in way of releasing yet another book. And I've read so many of them that, quite honestly, look, you say you didn't have anything, that you thought was really, you weren't that smart to put out a book, pretty much. Well, guess what? That would not put you in bad company. There's plenty of people that have put out some bad books on this case too. So,
Exactly.
so you can't hold that up as a standard that everybody who's put out a book on the case is intelligent because, well, let's be kind. There are some really bad pieces of literature out there, and probably no event in American history has been as written about as the Kennedy assassination. And I mean, look, even though I know at last count I'm well over 300 books deep as far as reading other people's material, I know that I still have not even covered half of what's out there as far as what could be read. A lot of it is repetitious, though. As you well know, the first chapter is usually, well, here's what happened in Dealey Plaza, and here's the official story. And now I'm going to get into some of my work, and now I'm going to tell you my conclusions, and that's the general structure of everybody's book,
Right.
with very few exceptions, right?
Yeah.
So, but
And I don't know about you, but just from reading all these books for all these years, it's just, it all meshes together somehow in your brain, and I always find myself having to go back and reread things, reopen the books up, skim chapters, just to keep everything straight, because it all does kind of flow together in one big ocean of knowledge,
Well, that's why I've said this before, and maybe this shows a lack of intelligence on my part, but the fact is that generally speaking, I have to read each book 3 times. Okay, one time is just a general sort of reading. It's really like skimming over it. The second time, I usually pick apart pieces of it, research it myself to verify what's going on, and then the third time, I take it through and actually, okay, now I've done my own research. I know the reality of what they're talking about. I've read the documents they're referring to, even in cases where I've talked to some of the same witnesses, because I'm nuts like that. I'll do that,
Oh, me too.
This stuff gets you though. It gets you really involved. But I mean, why did you actually start to do the Lone Gunman, and how did you come up with that name? Because I got to be honest with you, it turned me off at first when I first heard about it, because I thought for a moment that you were going to be one of these guys like, well, I don't want to make harsh comparisons and insult you or anything, but I mean, a few years ago I had a lot of conversation with this David Von Pine guy. Right. Who he is, right?
Oh, I do.
Okay, well, so I thought a Lone Gunman podcast, you'd probably be one of these Oswald Did It guys, and therefore actually ignored you out of the gate. Strangely enough, right?
No, I completely understand. The name did throw a lot of people, and it's pretty simple logic as to why I named the podcast that, and it's because I do it alone. That's pretty much it. That's the cleverness of it in my brain. It seemed cool at the time, and I'm just a lone podcaster, the Lone Gunman. That's me talking about the JFK assassination. The genesis of it, to get back to your original question, it is a buddy I met online, Doug Campbell. He also does a JFK related podcast called The Dallas Action. And
which is really good.
Which is really
good. Doug Campbell's podcast is really good too, by the way. Just For clarification, I don't support a lot of these guys that are doing this kind of stuff because a lot of them are really bad at it. I'm sorry, they just are. But I like, for instance, as far as podcasts go, I would say that Doug Campbell's stuff is good. I like Len Osanic, of course, and I like what you're doing. That's basically the three as far as the podcasts go in JFK land, as far as I'm concerned, just for my listeners' clarification. That's the only three that I generally bother with at all because there's a lot of it out there.
You're doing so. Yeah, and how we met was we both had sent a question into to Jim DiEugenio and Len Osanic to get read, and they just happened to get read on the same episode. And we were kind of stoked, and we started talking to each other, and we both really, really love what people were doing, like Len Osanic, like what you're doing, what Brent Holland was doing, but there wasn't, it just wasn't enough, I guess is what you could say. This, once a week, is okay, but it just, I don't know. I have a lot of time to listen to radio. Doing my job, I drive a truck. So I have plenty of time during the day to listen to radio or podcasts or what have you. And I just wanted to hear more, Mm-hmm. And originally, Doug and I's idea was to actually do a show together. But at the time, with neither one of us having a computer, he had a tablet and I had a phone. So it's real humble beginnings here at the Lone Gunman and the Dallas Action, but we're just going to figure out a way to logistically do it together. So I ended up doing it on my own. I found an app that allowed me to record, and it sounded decent enough at the time. And that's the way we did it. It was humble beginnings, and we're still doing it that way now. But it sounds a heck of a lot better than it did when we started 8 months ago for some reason.
Oh, right. And I used to actually write in stuff to Jim and Len over there too. I don't know if you ever heard any of the questions that I posed on there.
Oh, definitely.
But always an interesting discussion, and I do like the fact that Len switched to having Jim do those those question and answer kind of things on there. But same thing. I felt as though there could be a little more. There could be a little more in-depth commentary on certain things. I was glad that they were covering so many bases, and really Len is unmatched as far as coming up with an archive of individuals concerned with the JFK assassination, from authors and witnesses and even some of the less reliable fairy tale tellers out there, in my opinion. He has actually compiled quite the archive since 2001. So it's kind of a tall order to even begin to sort of get involved with this, because a guy like him, I mean, he started with Fletcher Prouty, which, to me is an interesting but difficult to sort through kind of nexus of information. For the general public, I mean, a lot of people don't understand what Prouty's significance was, the types of information that he was bringing forward. And now, of course, in the internet age, a lot of things are sort of more known to the public about, like, the behavior of the Central Intelligence Agency and things like that, that at the time that Prouty was originally publishing his books and doing his interviews with Len and also Radcliffe, before the JFK movie was released for home use and all that, a lot of people didn't quite understand what Prouty was trying to tell us. You know what I mean? So I find that interesting as well. But your podcast, I love how you focus on one thing and lay it out there. I mean, in a really honest kind of fashion, which, without kind of ending up marrying yourself to particular theories and things like that. You're just sort of examining what's coming up, in the literature, in the scope of things. And I don't know, I find it extremely refreshing because, again, when you're talking about a situation like Jim DiEugenio has his views on the case, and he's actually been scheduled to and backed out on me to come on here. But But he will eventually make an appearance here, I assure you. But the thing is that I've had on some other interesting people too to discuss this, and they're kind of married to their particular way of viewing the case. Whereas a guy like you and a guy like myself, I'm not exactly married to a particular theory or to a particular camp in this case. I am more after examining the whole scope of it and trying to sort of, how can I put this? Siphon it down to its most basic elements. You know what I mean? And
Exactly.
Unfortunately, there's been a lot of disinformation and things out there. And guys like you and me, we spend a lot of our time, unfortunately. I mean, if I could only have back some of those years out of the past, 2+ decades, to go back over real information as opposed to stuff that turned out to be dead ends or embellishments or fabrications, I'd probably have this thing solved by now. You know what I mean? And I'll tell you, one of the most recent episodes, and you guys can look this up, I was going to try and provide a link, and I can't find it right at this moment in the chat room, but if you look up the lone gunman and the phrase "Punchin' Judy," you'll find one of the most honest episodes I've ever heard on one of my favorite whipping posts, say in the literature, which is Judy Baker. The Judith Very Baker story, as it were, and now has evolved into the, not only the Me and Lee book, but the David Ferry book. And unfortunately, Tryon Day, who I do appreciate as a publisher when it comes to a lot of their other work, man, I'm blown away by how much support what I feel to be a completely fictitious story has gotten among the concerned public in the JFK case. And you kind of just laid it out pretty simply in that episode, what it is you could verify. And here's the funny part. I have never really put it out there in exactly the fashion that you did, but I have like zero arguments with anything that you had to say, except that, well, Ed Haslam is an interesting case, but I always point people back to Mary Ferry and the monkey virus too, because that seemed to be more of the less contaminated effort, if you will.
Right.
And I still would urge people to go look at it, although I completely disagree with the direction that Haslam has taken since then. But I was wondering what actually motivated you to decide to take on that particular, because there's been a lot of fabricated stories. If you've been involved with it for a couple of decades, you know that there's been a lot of like embellishments or misrepresentations of people's particular roles in the case, and things like that, which have been done to benefit publishers and people's own personal vanity one way or another over time. What actually got you to want to do that particular episode?
Well, it is a funny story. Back in September, me and Doug were afforded the opportunity to go to the Warren Report conference that they had in Alexandria, Virginia. And, we kind of worked out a deal with the guy running it, that we would promote it and do interviews for him there for the DVD and do the media, blast it out on social network, in exchange for, getting us in there. So Doug or I, neither one of us had ever been to a JFK conference before. So, because we live far away from Texas and never had the funds to get down there before, but this was close by me anyway. Doug had to travel a little bit, but the closer we got to the conference, and we set all this up a couple months in advance. We started seeing some of the what I consider, and this is my own opinion, to be more of the fringe people, the people, the kooky people, be signed on to speak at this place. And eventually, it got down to where Judy Baker was going to be there. And me and Doug were like, oh, Lord, we're in for it now. So we went to the conference. We met her in person. And I will tell you, a very nice lady, very typical, older lady, very soft spoken, a little lost on some things, but just nice in person, And I was thinking to myself, okay, because I didn't really want to say anything being part of the media there at the time. And I was putting it off doing the episode because I did an episode on the whole Oswald in the doorway thing. And Doug had hit Madeline Brown pretty good. And I'd been wanting to do Judith for a while, but I put it off. And she recently joined the Oswald Innocence campaign, okay? Mm. And I'm sure you know what that is and who's involved with that.
Well, actually, I just want to provide a little clarification for the listeners. First of all, The Alkin 6 photograph, if you look it up by the Alkin 6 photograph, it has been alleged since the 1970s anyways that this photograph, in a very small portion of it, features Lee Harvey Oswald standing in the doorway at the time of the shooting. The first guy that I knew about putting this out was Harold Weisberg. However, I think that it has been proven to be incorrect that it was Oswald who was in the image. But and I would really like to believe that was Lee in the doorway. I really would. And I think when I was very much younger, before I started to read on the case, I thought it was. But anyway, that's what you're referring to when we're talking about Oswald in the doorway. Madeline Brown, of course, is the alleged mistress of Lyndon Baines Johnson, who has passed away now, but who has been brought up in various publications, television shows, including The Men Who Killed Kennedy at one point, regarding how Lyndon Johnson was directly involved in the assassination. Part of her proof was this assassination party, which took place the night before, allegedly at the Murchison House, and all of that. Now, those of us who had experience with Madeline could tell you that story grew over time, could tell you that many of her stories grew over time. She was likely somebody who was involved with Lyndon Baines Johnson. She likely even gave birth to a child that was Lyndon Baines Johnson's. I've never actually seen the proof for it, but I'm assuming that seems to be, a part of the reality based on the testimony of a lot of other people. However, this is where we get embellishments from, because Madeline kept adding to her story over the years. Now, the Oswald Innocence Project, there was a guy named Ralph Sinkay who was involved in that, and he was very much involved in the Oswald in the doorway thing. He was a chiropractor. And this is a guy who I also consider sort of fringe and not really part of the more solid or legitimate world of researchers. Personal opinion, mine again, but these things are all worthy of examination. And look, discreditation if they're not part of the reality of the case. And so you guys were going through all this stuff, and of course Judy Baker, everybody who listens to me knows that I've got no use for her story because I just don't buy it. I think the proof of her involvement with Oswald begins and ends with exactly what you said on that podcast, by the way, which is that she can prove that she was in his proximity. She had a brush with history there, possibly, but outside of working at the Riley Coffee Company, there's no tangible proof for the remainder of her story. And yet this has gone on, and people fund her and back her, and now she's become more and more involved in the research community. And so this is you're now giving us the idea about how she was more involved in this recent set of conferences, and is now even planning to hold a conference of her own upcoming, right?
Right.
And meanwhile, this is kind of like, for anybody who is legitimately involved in following up on tangible evidence in the case, it almost becomes an embarrassment, really, to some of us, that this is the distraction, this is the misdirection, regardless of what the motive is, that leads people away from examining real proof. Is just a story that somebody doesn't have tangible proof for. So, okay, sorry, I editorialized way too much for the clarification of the listeners. I'm sorry, Rob, but it gets at me every single time that people want to yell at me about this stuff. I mean, Chauncey Holt's daughter was yelling at me on Facebook earlier today. You know, I mean,
Really?
yeah. All right. Anyway, sorry, I did interrupt and really go on too long, Rob. Please go ahead with what you were telling us about the conference and how you had made that deal, and Judy was involved. And nice lady, to meet her in person. I've always heard that, but you know, if my electronic communications with her are anything remotely like what her personality is truly like, I don't know what to say. But I've never heard any reports from anybody who's actually had to be face to face with her who hasn't said that she's, you know, really nice and accommodating and all that. So go ahead with what you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, just to compound a little bit on what you were saying, you know, it's just you see, and you're in a lot of groups on Facebook too, and you see it too. These people that just buy in and believe these people, no matter what they say, what they tell them, they just follow them blindly, and it poisons a lot of people's minds, you know, to believe that, okay, now we have all the answers, now we know what happened, everything's tied up in a nice, neat little bow because so and so said so. But in my mind, if you're going to make extraordinary claims, you better have extraordinary evidence to back it up, because I'm all about evidence and documents and testimony, not so much on word alone. And like I said, I've been wanting to do that Judith episode for a long time. And there's a lot of aspects to the case. Like today, I just put out a new episode called LBJ Didn't Do It. Okay? Mm-hmm. And everybody can go check that out. It's just these little things, you know, people like Roger Stone and Phil Nelson that allege that LBJ was this mastermind of the assassination. And, you know, just these little things that get to me. You know, these people think that, oh, Mac Wallace was in the 6th floor. They found his fingerprint, case closed. Everybody can go back to sleep. No more research needs to be done. And that's just not the case. And I don't know about you, but me personally, I learned something new damn near every day. You know, researching this case or talking to other people. Mm-hmm. And I have an ever-evolving theory about this whole puzzle. You know, if I learn a new piece of information, then I have to somehow assimilate it into my theory or exclude it, you know, or exclude something else to make room for it. It's an ever-evolving process if you keep researching. And that's just what I do. My show is basically me pouring my brain out on the table and saying, here you go. This is what I'm thinking about right now. And this is where I'm at in my research. This is what's bugging me, or this is what I found. You know, just things like that. It's just an opportunity to, you know, it's more like a therapy session for me, really. Just let it out.
And you need one after a while because, yeah, here's another one of those wonderful things where they try and tie it up into a neat little package. The LBJ Did It camp. You know, and this really, look, this starts from day one because, okay, it's actually fairly logical and fairly reasonable to assume that LBJ must have had something to do with it if you go from day one, because after all, this happened in Texas. It's his home state. You know, one of his mentors is in the car with him. You know, it looks like something that LBJ could have potentially set up, right? If you just take it face value.
Value.
But when you start to dig into these things and you realize that people are relying on the claims of people like Bar McClellan and these types of people and
Billy Celestes
and Billy Celestes, who was a convicted con man and really, you know, never actually seemed to tell the truth about anything throughout his life, and you want to believe that. I mean, I got into a major argument even with this is going to sound totally unrelated, but James Tague, who I was speaking to not long before he got sick and passed away, because he absolutely wanted to tell me and tell the world that he knew from inside information that LBJ was the mastermind behind the whole thing. You know?
Oh, yeah, he wrote a book about it too, didn't he?
He sure did. And that came out right before he passed away. You know, and it was kind of sad because, I mean, I really wanted to get some more information from him about, you know, that day in Dealey Plaza. I mean, this is the guy, by the way, who was actually often referred to as the third wounded man For anybody who doesn't know who James Tague is, he was the guy who was struck with either bullet fragments or fragments from a curbstone much further down the road from where Kennedy's car was at the time the shooting took place. Okay, virtually the whole reason why the Warren Commission had to adopt the magic bullet theory based on the fact that they only had the 3 shots. Okay, very interesting man, very interesting observations he had, but he got all involved in that very same sort of nexus of individuals who wanted to push the LBJ did it thing. Now, that being said, LBJ, not a clean character, definitely a corrupt politician, most certainly a devious individual. I mean, we're talking about, stolen elections. We're talking about all sorts of corruption. He was under investigation. Even if you listen to the broadcasts from Dallas radio that morning when they were talking about Kennedy arriving, guess what was in the news? The Bobby Baker scandal. There was all kinds of stuff going on. Life magazine was about ready to put out articles before the assassination took it over for the next couple of months, all about the corruption of our vice president at the time, who later ascended to be president. And I'm not saying that this guy was, a clean guy, was a venerable, wonderful person in American history. But to be the mastermind behind this, there's simply no tangible proof for it,
Exactly.
And I believe that, tapes that he knew nobody would ever hear, when he's asking J. Edgar Hoover, of all people, were any of those shots intended for me, kind of leads me to believe that he had no idea who the shooters were, who they were aiming at. I mean, there was even the contention at the time that maybe somebody was aiming at Connolly, to try and get Kennedy. And that's been revisited various times, and that's foolishness as well. Believe me, whoever was aiming at Kennedy got Kennedy, and Connolly just got struck, coincidentally, because he wasn't the major figure that anybody needed to take out for any particular reason. And Johnson just, ascended to the position where he did. I think he had the inside information that Kennedy's health was bad and felt that he might be able to take the presidency earlier than he did. I think that it's very possible that somebody told him, look, be prepared, you're going to be president very soon. I think that all these things are possible, but to say that he was the architect of this plan or he was the controller behind all this is sheer nonsense. And the Mac Wallace thing, which I found extremely intriguing to begin with, but has now kind of been disproven. And Mac Wallace, again, another fascinating and nefarious character who was really connected to LBJ and everything else, but still it doesn't lead necessarily to connection to the assassination. We could go over all of that, but that would take time in and of itself. But I'm glad that you did that episode, and I'm going to be happy to check that out. It's just called LBJ Didn't Do It.
That's right.
I'm going to definitely have to check that out and see what you have to say there. But you're in a unique position of actually, I've never heard anything you had to say on the case that I disagree with, which is really weird, because usually you put 3 of us in a room and you'll get 3 different opinions.
Exactly.
But this is what stood out to me with you is that you were examining this stuff, and I know it's an ever evolving process. And I'm really glad that you put that out there, because people have asked me over time, why is it that you seem to have backed off of certain things? It's because I've learned different things over time. I mean, I'll give you a total, for instance, that has nothing to do with any of these great master theories out there right now, but even David Lifton's work. Okay, I don't know what you think of David Lifton, never asked you, but some of his work requires leaps of faith. It just does. Okay. Yes. And some of the things that he finds, which are interesting anomalies, have more than one explanation. Now, he offers an explanation for them, but when one examines other aspects of what's going on during each of these situations, I'll give you a quick for instance. The fact that there was disturbance with the corpse on its way into Bethesda, okay? Right. Guess what the problem is there? You can't get an ornamental casket through certain doorways at Bethesda at that time. So, what does that lead you to know about what they had to do in order to bring that body in?
They had to put it in a gray metal shipping casket.
And thus, the whole switched casket idea is out the window if you understand that logistically it was impossible to bring that thing in. And plus it was difficult to carry because they had already broken a handle and everything else trying to get it into different places. I mean, there was all kinds of problems with that. And later on, of course, Bobby Kennedy disposed of it. A lot of the interesting stuff that he does bring forth in his book, Best Evidence, is revolutionary in that it got us to look at the medical aspects in a different fashion. It got us to examine certain documents that previous to that book coming out had not been really in the hands of researchers, and took all the way till the 1990s and the Assassination Records Review Board for us to get clarification on a lot of it. But even with that clarification, we still have a great deal of unanswered questions that Mr. Lipton missed because of these enormous leaps of faith in his book. And that's not to say that I don't like David Lipton's work. That's just to say that it's a little incomplete. And I think that no one author has actually done a complete job on this case, from start to finish, because there is just so much going on. I don't know how you feel about that, but I'm just saying that in general, it's almost impossible to tell somebody, look, here's one book, go get it. It tells you everything. You know what I'm saying? Yeah,
and I'm still waiting. I guess it's been, 20 years now on David Lipton's Lee Harvey Oswald book. It seems like it's never, ever going to come out.
Yeah, well, if you listen to Judy, she'll tell you that that's because her revelations, totally discredit his book, so therefore he can't bring it out. But, okay. Sorry, there's a joke that probably only you and I will understand, but yes.
Hey. I know exactly what you're referring to.
Absolutely true. We are still waiting for that Oswald book there, David, so, okay. Oh, man.
And just to touch on one thing that you were talking about with the medical evidence, I got the opportunity to interview Dennis David, who was the, I forget what his exact title was there at Bethesda. He was like the skipper of the day or something like that. But he was actually one of the guys that received JFK's body in the gray metal shipping casket.
Right.
And I got a chance to interview him, and it's really cool to hear this dude talk. So everybody, if you check out the Lone Gunman older shows, you'll find that interview with Dennis David. And also at the conference, I got a chance to talk to Doug Horn and David Manick. And I'll tell you, in reference to the medical evidence, those guys they're taking what David Lipton started and taking it to a whole nother level. And pretty soon, I think that it's going to become really, really clear exactly what happened and exactly when it happened in reference to the wounds on JFK and the autopsy and what happened with all those caskets. And it will be sorted out very soon. I think they're on the right path, and they've been doing great work, in my opinion.
No, absolutely. David Mantic is a guy that I refer to for sure. Doug Horn, on the other hand, I mean, I've got disagreements with him. I would add one person to that mix, though, if you want to get to the total reality, and that is Sherry Feaster, because she has done an interpretation on a lot of this stuff that even Mantic understands that her understanding of the actual forensics is unique among any of the people that are writing and still pursuing this subject, So, and I had her on my show last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago now, and I had an interesting conversation with her. But I mean, I would add all of them together and say that, yeah, if you take the actual medical evidence, you can tell the entire story of the shooting without having to, immerse yourself in Dealey Plaza. As so many of us have done for so many years,
Right.
And
I'll tell you something else cool we did, Chuck,
sure.
At the conference. Okay, Doug Horn, he grabbed me and Doug, and he's like, come on. He's like, I want to show you guys something. And it's real late on a Saturday night. We're a couple in the wind, and we're smoking Cuban cigars outside with Doug Horn and Dennis David and Greg Burnham. We're just hanging. I'm in a totally surreal world. Like, is this really happening? But he grabs us. He's like, "Come on, you guys got to come upstairs and see this." So we go upstairs in one of the penthouse suites, and we sit down in the little living room in there in the hotel room, and we're in there with I think her name's Sydney and Tom Whitehead, I believe it is, and they're working on a 4K scan of the Zapruder film. Now, what a 4K is it's something like 4 times the resolution of 1080p is now. I mean, it's like super, super, super clear. And what they had was they're working on a documentary, and they were there actually filming people for it. But they allowed us to see the part where the Zapruder film is shown in 4K resolution. Okay, and dude, let me tell you, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that film was crudely altered at the least. It is quite obvious when you see it blown up that much and that clearly that the back of JFK's head was painted in with the black. No doubt. That orange flap defect that comes out after he's shot in the head, totally fake. Totally fake. And it's going to turn everything on its head when this documentary comes out, because there will be no denying it then.
Well,
I was just simply blown away.
No, absolutely. I mean, and I have always contended that the film is altered. As to the nature of its alteration, I've always had difficulty sorting that out because, as you know, the copies have been suspect that
Right.
that we've been able to get our hands on. And I've seen some interesting copies. I've seen a forensic copy of this, which is one of the few that was ever made, because a lot of people don't realize you can actually get a copy of the Zapruder film, but it's a big pain in the neck and it costs a lot of money. And it wasn't my copy, by the way, it was somebody else's, but actually did see it projected, and even just in that state where it's not being, scanned at this high resolution, you can see a lot of really weird things going on there. Now, I don't believe that it was completely fabricated.
No,
But
I don't either.
yeah, but to say that it has been tampered with, I believe there's no doubt in that it has been. Now, to explain the exact nature of it, I'm not capable of doing so. But I would say that I am really interested in seeing that documentary, because that's the Hollywood group, right?
That is right. That's them. Yep. The one D. Eugenio talks about.
Right, and I would love to see that. Can't wait to see that. Actually, if you hear about it coming out, or a way I can get my hands on it before everybody else, let me know, because that
I'll
is
definitely let you know.
That is something I definitely would love to see and promote, even if that's if it's going to show what I think it's going to show. I definitely want to be part of pushing it out there to the public. I'll tell you that.
No doubt.
But the Zapruder film aside, and all of these other interesting nebulous things aside, let me ask you this, because this always gets asked to me, like, what is it that actually got you to start to look at the case in the first place? Right? Because for me, it was a strange kind of discussion when I was a kid in grade school, and my whole problem with the case was, how did a guy get shot when he's in the custody of the police? This is where my problems began, but then I started to read books, and then decided to contact the people in the books and ask them if this is what they really said and this is what they really saw, and this is how my journey began, in short. Next thing I know is I'm going out to interview people that were connected to organized crime, because I had access to them. And do that on behalf of others who were a little bit, shall we say, shy to do so. Stuff like that, and turned over a lot of that research to other people. And really what I ended up doing was showing dispositive connections as far as the whole mob did it thing, which drives me up a wall.
Yeah.
Because to this day, there are people that still say that, it must have been the Italians, basically, and everybody
Yeah.
seizes upon, the fact that, 3 interesting organized crime figures had to testify to the House Select Committee and all that. But, knowing where the mob and the agency began and ended at one point was rather difficult. Even so, you would not have used these guys for this job. Now, the CIA using these guys in Cuba, the CIA using these guys in other countries, completely, totally logical, understandable, and coherent along with what we know about the agency. But when it came to doing this on the streets of Dallas, these were not the guys they employed. I'm sorry.
No.
And to say that they were the masterminds behind it is, well, almost as silly as saying LBJ was running the show.
Right.
Almost.
I agree.
But anyway, what is it that really got you interested in it in the first place, though?
Well, it was real simple. Back in high school in the 80s, I had to do a report on John F. Kennedy. And I got stuck with him. I didn't pick him. It was just who they gave me. So I started reading about John Kennedy, and I knew, he had been shot in office. And, the more I read about it, I was like, something just doesn't sound right about all this. And the first book I ever read on the Kennedy assassination was Jim Garrison's On the Trail of the Assassins.
Great
After
book.
I read that.
Sorry, I was
was
just
it.
saying that was a great book because that really opened my eyes early on as well. And before Oliver Stone,
Right.
Stone dramatized it, by the way, yeah, that was available.
Exactly.
Yep. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yep, I read that, and well, ever since I was a little kid, Chuck, I've always been interested in mysteries and the unexplained. I mean, that was one of my favorite shows back in the day with Leonard Nimoy, and I used to watch Scooby-Doo religiously. I mean, I've always been interested in mysteries and the unexplained and in all different kinds of phenomenon and everything. But as soon as I read that book, I was like, oh my God, this totally makes sense, and I need to read more. I need to read more. I need to read more. So I went to the library back in the days when you actually went to the library to get books. And
Yep.
I think I checked out everything they had on the JFK assassination. And I just read, man. I read and read and read. Then that movie came out, Oliver Stone's JFK. And I was like, awesome. This supports everything I'm looking into. And, all through the 90s, that's all I did was read. And then the internet came about. And that just opened up a whole another world of research and access to people that you didn't have before, communication with people you didn't have before, where you can share thoughts and ideas in an instant and bounce ideas off people. And ever since then, man, I've been sucked in at an early age and never looked back.
You're just old enough to remember all the crazy work I had to do getting a hold of phone books from other parts of the country to see if I could look up people's names in order to find them, right?
Yeah.
Man, that was a trip. And I mean, I was a musician when I was younger, so I got to travel to certain places. I wound up just in areas where I could reach certain people that had moved from one place to another. Interesting convergence of individuals near Pittsburgh. Another interesting convergence of individuals in California that had direct ties to the assassination. And this was just, again, a matter of, well, let me see if this person is who this is in the phone book, because I read that they had moved here and this kind of thing. Amazing, though, a lot of them actually remained in the Dallas area.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the police that I wound up speaking to. I mean, I think I counted up something like 50 different policemen that I interviewed on the case. Nothing like what Larry Sneed did. That book, No More Silence. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I just got it in the mail last week, as a matter of fact.
There you go. See, and that thing will spin your head because there's a lot of confusion in there. You'll find different guys saying that they were the ones who did the same thing. Let's just say. But what's interesting about what Sneed did there is he didn't add his own commentary to a lot of that. He just kind of presented what he found, which makes that book an interesting resource, and yet one of the ones that's really ignored out there. I'm sure you agree, though, that one of the best overall primers for the case is probably Jim Douglas's book, JFK and the unspeakable, because that gives you the real sense of exactly how far you can go with the case for certain.
Right.
And James Douglas is a guy, very interesting writer, by the way. First came to my attention when he was covering the Martin Luther King trial in '99 with Probe magazine. Okay. And for those of you who don't know, there was actually a wrongful death lawsuit for Martin Luther King Jr. In Memphis. You might want to look that up and see where that actually went. Regarding the official history versus the reality. And I've discussed that stuff too, and I mean, looked into that as well. I mean, all of this stuff, and I'm glad you brought up Leonard Nimoy too, because I remember In Search Of, and I was a big fan of that. Do you remember the JFK episode or the Lee Harvey Oswald episode as it was on there?
Not right offhand, no.
Well, it's around. If you look for it, you can find a Lee Harvey Oswald episode, and it's kind of crude and just sort of, asks a lot of questions like that show did. But that thing covered everything from JFK and and the Lincoln assassination to pyramids and aliens. So kind of a really wide variety of subjects that show covered. One of those things I kind of miss about TV when I was a kid. So,
me too.
And so you kind of came to it the same way I did, except you weren't pestering people to death when you were younger, I guess, like I was. I spent a lot of time. I'm serious, man. It was like calling people up, and a lot of people just hung up on me. I mean, I said that when I did a show with James Corbett. He asked me to come on and speak about Oswald, which I don't even think I'm an expert on at all. But apparently I could fill an hour for him with no problem.
Hey.
But the thing was...
All those people hanging up on you, though, is worth it as long as you get one person to give you at least one little nugget that you can use,
Well, exactly. Like, actually speaking to Jim Lavelle, who was one of the guys who was cuffed to Oswald when he was shot, never got to speak to Graves, but Lavelle was an interesting guy. I'll tell you the funniest thing I ever heard, though, is, what is his name now? Marion Baker, okay? The funniest thing I ever heard was out of his mouth, which was this. If I would have known, and I'm gonna kind of cut down the language on this, but if I would have known that guy was going to be so much trouble, I would have shot him myself. And
Lordy.
For those of you that don't know, this is the motorcycle cop who confronts Oswald on the second floor 90 seconds after the gunshots are fired, and winds up leaving him alone because Mr. Truly tells him that he works there. So therefore, they ignored him. The guy who, if you look at the JFK, the Oliver Stone film, confronts him while he's drinking a Coke. Although some people seem to contend that it might have been a Dr. Pepper. The fact is that 90 seconds after the shots are fired on the 6th floor, he confronts Oswald perfectly calm, cool, and collected on the 2nd floor with his soda in his hand. Although he did change his written testimony a couple of times and actually struck the whole thing about the soda at one point. I'm sure you're aware of that too, right?
Yeah. Well, the first report, first affidavit he did, it didn't even have the lunchroom confrontation in it. So
that's right.
Did it really happen, or he talks about running into somebody on the 4th or 5th floor, but it wasn't Oswald. So
right,
who knows?
Right, and the weird thing when you start, and if you want to really give yourself a headache, you dig into the Dallas police affidavits and archives. And like I said, you'll find all sorts of like contradictory stuff going on there. These guys claim they did things when it was somebody else that had to have done it. And I got an honest admission from one of the Dallas cops where they said, sometimes one guy would write a report for 2 or 3 of us, And we would just tell them what to put in there, and it wasn't necessarily the guy who, say, picked up the shells, or it wasn't necessarily the guy who found the rifle, and so on. That was kind of their practice, and it wasn't just about this case. That was just sort of the sloppy way that they sort of did things in Dallas.
That sounds about right.
Despite the fact that they were, pretty close to the murder capital of the United States at that point. This is the way they conducted themselves. The city of hate. Ay, ay, ay. Well, anyway, we're down to the last couple of minutes here, and you know what I want to do is, and I'm sorry I've kind of talked a lot over you and everything. I'll have to have you back on to discuss some more of this stuff if you get a chance, and if you don't mind. But I do want to direct people where they can find the Lone Gunman, and also you got another project you're working on now too, right?
I do, and thanks for mentioning that. The Lone Gunman can be found on Spreaker.com, Stitcher.com, iTunes.com, TuneIn Radio, and TuneIn has an app, Stitcher has an app, and it's on Blueberry. And we also promote it out of our website, which is www.22novembernetwork.wordpress.com. That's our little home for me and Doug's podcast and all of our blog writers. And I urge everybody to check that out. And much like you, I'm branching out a little bit, and I'm doing a different podcast that is everything else other than JFK related. Because I'm very much a conspiracy realist. When I look at things, I see, for some reason, I just see conspiracy in it, unless I can prove that there's not one. And, that's for everything else. That's the unexplained, that's the paranormal, that's, other conspiracies. And that is called Strange Days Indeed. And that right now can only be heard on Spreaker.com. And if you go on Spreaker, you search my name, Rob Clark, or the Lone Gunman podcast, and you'll find them.
Well, absolutely, and you can also find him on social media, occasionally having something to say about these things, and I'm sure you'll have a lot more to say about the other stuff besides JFK, too. And that's the thing, I kind of had to reach out from just focusing on that after a while, because it just gets to be too much, man.
I know.
You get so immersed in it, and it's almost like you're speaking a different language from the rest of the planet after a while.
Yeah.
Because you are, when we're talking about, bullet lead analysis and what happened with the neutron activation stuff and the HSCA and, and exactly what the Clark panel was up to, people look at you like, what are you talking about?
Exactly. You can't talk to your wife or your buddy at work about this stuff. People look at you, start looking at you funny, and that's another reason I started the podcast, was just to have another outlet. Because I don't know about anybody else out there, but in your real life, it's hard to find other like-minded people and to actually know what you're talking about, and you can have a conversation with about it. And that's really what I'm enjoying from all this.
All right, and that's kind of what I'm after here with the radio show, is looking for like-minded people to interact with, and really glad that you took the time to do this with me tonight. And want to thank everybody who decided to tune in to us, either on the TuneIn app, the Shoutcast, the iTunes Internet Radio, or if you just went to the website, which is at ucy.tv/TOE. I really do appreciate everybody who listens, everybody who sends in questions. We didn't get any questions or call-ins tonight. I actually didn't ask for callers. Maybe next time we could take callers and discuss this whole thing a little more in depth. But
Sounds
I wanted
good,
to
man. I'll come back anytime you want me to.
Cool, and I really wanted to make sure that I pointed everybody to your podcast, because, like I say, a lot of it is a waste of time. You get a guy who just sits there and talks and has nothing to say, but seems to enjoy the sound of his own voice, which I'm often accused of. But
Me too.
But I try, ladies and gentlemen, to bring you some sort of information every single time that I come on the air. And again, I'm very, very glad to have had you on with me tonight, and also Roger Landry was my guest in the first hour. So, as I always like to say at the very end here, It is a privilege, and I hope that everybody out there has a good night. And you know what? Every single day you can learn something new. Every single day you can fold something else into your experiences, and it will simply add to the individual that you are. So, there's my hopeful bit for the night, and my obnoxious bumper is just about due to kick in. And let's see if it will. Not sure. Oh, Rob, my clock must be off. Not by much, though. I know it's coming. It's noisy and obnoxious, and it's got a lot of my own voice on it. There we go.
There it is.
Everybody have a good night.
Microphone up close. Webcam microphone up close.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was a...
See, but I have the files. You know, I read the stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things.
I said to
all these
myself,
books,
that guy
how can that
reminds
be
me
possible?
of the brain.
You know, the days and the final slap of choice, and on computers, doesn't really matter. Internet, professional wrestlers, and not Jesse Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the cartoon comes from as long as it's real. It doesn't. It's hard to get real information. Because seriously,